it now.
Okay, so where's my, wait a second. Here it is. Okay, that should put me in. Oh, buffering. There we go. Okay, here. All right, so who was this hero of both America and France, and how did he gain the respect and love of both General Washington and our nation? Lafayette began his life in a small town named Chavagnac in the southwestern French province of Avignon. He was a wealthy French aristocrat with an impressively lengthy name, Marie Joseph Paul Yves Roche Gilbert de Montier, Marquis de Lafayette. That lengthy name seemed to foretell of what was to be his long and productive life, always devoted to the Enlightenment principles of freedom and democracy. At the young age of 17, Lafayette resolved to join the American fight for independence and came to America on La Victoire, the ship he bought and named for victory. Once here, he and George Washington quickly developed a lifelong relationship documented by many to be like that of father and son. He shed his blood for the American cause at Brandywine, did much to feed, clothe, and support the troops at Valley Forge and throughout the American Revolution, and was instrumental in achieving the victory at Yorktown. After his success as an American Major General, Lafayette returned to France and became a renowned statesman who supported the rights of Native Americans, defended religious freedom, backed democratic revolutions in both Europe and South America, spoke out against capital punishment and solitary confinement, and supported women and their ideas and causes. From July of 1824 through September of 1825, the Marquis de Lafayette, symbol of the Enlightenment and the last surviving Major General of the American Revolution, made his farewell tour of the United States. He covered all of the then existing 24 states as our nation's guest. Everywhere he went, he was met with a hero's welcome. Following his return to France, many monuments were built and areas of cities and towns renamed to commemorate and memorialize his visit. Two examples being Fayette Street in Baltimore and Lafayette Square in Washington, D.C. My presentation today will look at the reasons for the Lafayette tour, the implications of that tour to early 1800s America, his visit to Frederick, December 29th through 31st of 1824, and finally, the plans now in progress to celebrate the bicentennial of Lafayette's American farewell tour and how all of you can become involved with this monumentous happening. It can honestly be said that other than Alexander the Great, the Marquis de Lafayette had witnessed and participated in more momentous events on two continents than perhaps any other. As you have already heard, by the age of 19, young Gilbert left the comforts of Paris and the court of Louis XVI at Versailles to join the Continental Army and fight for liberty with the man who became his lifelong father figure, George Washington. After the war ended, Lafayette returned to France and pursued both a military and political career, championing the ideals of liberty and democracy for which he and Washington fought side by side. With the help of Thomas Jefferson, he wrote the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, which was inspired by our own Declaration of Independence. On July 11th of 1789, it was read to the French Assembly and met with celebratory acclaim by the liberal members in attendance. 3 days later, the Bastille was stormed. Soon thereafter, Lafayette sent to Washington the key to the Bastille, writing, "Dear General, this key is a tribute which I owe to you as a son to my adopted father, as an aide-de-camp to my general, and as a missionary of liberty for its patriarch." With the onset of the French Revolution, Lafayette was appointed commander-in-chief of Paris's National Guard and tried desperately to steer a democratic course through the years of the French Revolution. In August of 1792, radical factions took control of the French government, and Lafayette was labeled a traitor and ordered to be arrested. He fled France, but was captured by Austrian troops. He spent more than 5 years from 1792 through 1797 in an Austrian prison under dreadful conditions, and the majority of time in solitary confinement. It was here that Adrienne, his loving wife, and 2 daughters, Anastasie and Virginie, named after Washington's home state, stayed with him for 2 years and were known in Europe as the prisoners of Olmütz. Lafayette did eventually return to France, but only after both Adrienne and the American Congress repetitively petitioned Napoleon to secure his release. However, once back in France, Lafayette refused to participate in Napoleon's government or his military conquests, despite the invitations to do so. To Lafayette, a government leader was a president and not an emperor. So instead, he continued his determined efforts to bring democracy to France. After the conservative Bourbon kings were restored to the French throne in 1814, he became a strong voice for the liberal democratic members of the Chamber of Deputies, a position which he held for the remainder of his life. Now, I've often been asked why it was that the 55-year-old Lafayette did not return to the United States to fight against the British in the War of 1812. In way of French history, in 1804, Napoleon was crowned Emperor of France, something Lafayette opposed. With this dictator, when he offered him a Senate seat and the Legion of Honor, a military award created by Napoleon in 1802, Lafayette again refused, stating he would gladly accept the honors if they had come from a democratic government. It was during this time that Jefferson offered Lafayette the governorship of Louisiana after the Louisiana Purchase. Although a reasonable escape from the French political unrest, Lafayette declined, saying he desired to continue his crusade for French democracy. In 1803, Britain declared war on France that lasted until 1813. And although America tried to remain neutral in this war, the impressment of American sailors by both the British and the French made this difficult. This led to the United States on June 18th of 1812 to declare war against England, and this nearly included France. This political situation would have made it very difficult for Lafayette to join in the American cause. However, throughout the time of the American War of 1812, Lafayette worked quietly and tirelessly for French democracy. He became increasingly aware of the many European countries that considered Napoleon an enemy. The situation finally erupted in 1814 with the invasion of France by supporters of the Bourbon monarchy. When Louis XVIII was restored to the throne, Lafayette was able to return to the Chamber of Deputies for the next 10 years and continued his liberal democratic agenda, working toward a constitutional monarchy. Therefore, when having to choose between the American War of 1812 and Napoleon's French dictatorship, Lafayette chose to remain in France and continue his fight for democracy. By 1824, Charles X ascended the throne, instituting a conservative, undemocratic monarchy. By this time, Lafayette had already been under tight surveillance as a dissident, so he chose to retire from public service to live with his family at La Grange, an estate inherited by his wife. He left intensely saddened as nearly every vestige of liberal democratic thinking had disappeared from France. It was at this time that the opportunity to tour the United States came in the form of an invitation from President James Monroe. Happily, at the age of 67, Lafayette left France for his final trip to the America he loved. Meanwhile, the early 1820s saw the United States working to solidify its political system. It was a nation now free of any wartime obligations. Thomas Jefferson, as a lifelong friend of France, had negotiated the Louisiana Purchase in 1803 and secured America's westward expansion. But by 1823, both Congress and President James Monroe the last of the founding father presidents, decided that a visit by Lafayette might help unify a democracy being fractured by the politics of the divisive 1824 presidential race involving John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, Andrew Jackson, and William Crawford. No longer the slim, young 19-year-old military officer in a powdered wig, Lafayette happily accepted the invitation and returned to the land of his youth. But he returned a different person, having survived the French Revolution, suffered severe hardship after 5 years in prison, grieved the loss of his much-loved wife, Adrienne, and experienced the nearly total disintegration of the ideals of democracy in his homeland. He decided that this would be his farewell tour to the America he loved, and as we will see without a doubt, loved him back. The invitation to Lafayette was made as America was approaching the 50th anniversary of its Declaration of Independence. Monroe wanted Lafayette to reignite a feeling of greater patriotism in American citizens. But his invitation was also deeply personal because Monroe and Lafayette had a long history together. It was a relationship that had been cemented during the American Revolution. How did this come about, you might ask? Well, as the Battle of Brandywine ended in darkness on September 11th of 1777, General Washington immediately asked for Lafayette's whereabouts. Earlier in the day, he had quite reluctantly agreed to grant the young man's repeated request to join in the battle. In the darkness, no one could find Lafayette, and a very distraught Washington began to believe he had lost his young friend, about whom most knew he cared deeply. It was Henry Knox, aware of Washington's fears and concerns, who upon seeing the wounded Lafayette quickly sent word to the general that the youth had been shot, but added, quote, "The boy we thought lost had been found." As soon as General Washington heard this news, he immediately sent his personal surgeon, John Corcoran, saying of Lafayette, "Take care of him as if he were my son, for I love him with the same affection." Along with his surgeon, he also sent a young captain to protect Lafayette. This captain spoke fluent French and himself had already proven his valor and been wounded at the Battle of Trenton. It was this same young American officer who would become the future President James Monroe. And thereafter, both he and Lafayette would become lifelong friends. Therefore, it is not surprising that Monroe's invitation was warmly received and readily accepted by Lafayette. As to the farewell tour itself, sadly, in order to visit America, the once wealthy Lafayette had to sell cattle and borrow money in order to finance his trip. He had spent much of his wealth in support of the American Revolution, and nearly all the rest was lost in the chaos of the American Revolution and the dictatorship under Napoleon. What was saved came only through the tireless efforts of his wife, Adrienne, who had died in 1807 at the young age of 48. When Lafayette left for America, he was accompanied by his son, Georges Washington Lafayette. Georges can be seen here at the age of 11 with his 33-year-old father, together celebrating the first Bastille Day on July 14th of 1780. The other portrait is of Georges as he looked in 1825 at age 46. Also accompanying Lafayette was his personal secretary, Auguste Lavoisier, a young French captain who, like the Marquis, had expressed a willingness to overthrow the conservative Bourbon kings. It was Lavoisier who kept the diary of the tour that was published in France upon their return. The title was Lafayette in America, 1824 to 1825, Journal of a Voyage to the United States. It has since been translated unabridged from French to English by Alan Hoffman, the now president of the American Friends of Lafayette. Their American tour would span 13 months and take the men over 6,000 miles, traveling by stagecoach, horseback, canal barge, and steamboat. While Lafayette did enjoy the opportunity to see old friends and revisit the memories of his youth, it was the story of American democracy that he desired to take back to France, hoping to use it as an example to revive liberal political views at a time when the conservative French Bourbon kings were stifling all Enlightenment ideals. To Monroe's relief, Lafayette's very first footsteps on American soil triggered a national memory that unleashed the deepest and most heartfelt gratitude, love, and respect by Americans for their hero. Each city and town worked to receive their eminent guest in the grandest of styles, and their speeches and comments reflected their high esteem for Lafayette, although sometimes quite comically. For example, in his memoirs, Josiah Quincy Jr. describes the moment when Lafayette left Vermont for New Hampshire in June of 1825. To me, his last words were, "Remember, we must meet again in France." And so saying, he kissed me upon both cheeks. Upon relating this occurrence, an enthusiastic lady of my acquaintance said, "If Lafayette had kissed me, depend upon it, I would never have washed my face again as long as I lived." Indeed, the ladies were beyond excited to meet the noble and gracious Marquis, and the story is told that upon introduction, the Frenchmen would always bow low and gracefully kiss their gloved hand. Many a lady, upon receiving such a kiss, immediately swore to never wash that glove again. Hence, many museums have beautiful gloves, such as the one seen here, many unwashed. As for Lafayette, he is quoted to have said that it was more than embarrassing to repetitively have to kiss his own face. As for the farewell tour itself, it was quite a fast-paced schedule for the 67-year-old man. Using this pictured map of his tour gives us a quick overview of his travels. After arriving in New York City to great fanfare in August of 1824, he traveled to the northern and eastern states, then on to Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. Lafayette spent time in the new capital, Washington, D.C., and then in Annapolis, where in 1784, in gratitude for his service to America, Maryland was the first to name him and all of his male heirs as natural-born citizens of the United States. Christmas was spent in Baltimore, and while there, in reply to the September 1824 letter by Colonel John McPherson, Lafayette accepted the invitation to visit Frederick from December 29th to the 31st. Now, that September invitation was co-signed by Lawrence Everhart, a Middletown Methodist minister. However, Everhart was also an American Revolutionary War hero who fought valiantly in many battles, including at Brandywine, where he is thought to have served with other Maryland regiments under General Sullivan. When Lafayette was shot, reputable accounts, including Lafayette's own, state that the first to assist him were his two French aides-de-camp, Major de Jamette and Chevalier Le Coulombe. They quickly lifted him onto his horse so as to escape capture by the British. However, Sergeant Everhart was also there and helped Lafayette, either when he reached Chester Bridge, carrying him to a nearby home in Chester, or he may have been one of the soldiers hand-selected by General Washington and led by James Monroe, who would guarantee Lafayette's safety by quickly transporting him away from the battlefield. No matter the case, Lafayette immediately recognized Everhart when he greeted him at Jug Bridge, just outside of Frederick. And at the dinner that evening, Everhart was given the second place of honor to Lafayette's right, while Lafayette sat in the first honored seat. Now, Lafayette arrived in Frederick at 4 p.m. on December 29th. He was greeted with great celebration, and pictured here is the Virginia McLaughlin mural of his carriage being escorted by troops of militia with great pomp and fanfare. Lafayette stayed in the home of Colonel John McPherson, now the McPherson Ross residence on Council Street. During those 3 days of celebration, nearly 8,000 people crowded into the 1824 Frederick, normally the home of 3,000 residents. After a period of rest, Lafayette was escorted to a sumptuous formal banquet at the Talbot House. The 200 invited guests at $4 each, which is about $120 today, enjoyed delicacies of the season, including venison, Lafayette's favorites, oysters, and 20-year-old rye whiskey. 13 formal toasts were given in honor of the 13 colonies, and these were followed by many, quote, volunteer toasts, which focused on the military, the Navy, the planned Chesapeake and Ohio Canal, and the American free economy, reflecting on manufacturing and agriculture, especially appropriate for the rich and fertile lands of the Monocacy River Valley. Lafayette toasted the old Maryland line and the young Frederick volunteers, and John Barney, General Joshua Barney's brother, raised the toast to the ladies. Now, an interesting volunteer toast was to the Greek War for Independence from the Ottoman Empire, which had begun in 1821. The exact words of the toast were, quote, to the suffering Greeks, may they meet with a Lafayette, close quote. Now, this statement intrigued me, and so I did a bit of research, and interestingly enough, the Greeks did have their Lafayette in the form of Dr. Samuel Gridley Howe. He was an American abolitionist who, in the very same year when the toast was made in Frederick, left Boston and volunteered with the Greek army as a soldier and doctor. Howe's bravery, enthusiasm, and ability as a commander, as well as his humanity, won him the title of the Lafayette of the Greek Revolution. The war lasted until 1829 and ended with Greek freedom. Howe later went on to have a tumultuous marriage to Julia Ward, who, as Mrs. Howe, wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Small world. The day after the banquet on December 30th, Lafayette reviewed the militia in front of Talbot's Hotel at West Patrick and North Court Street, met with the ladies in the afternoon, and that evening was honored at an elegant grand ball where tickets cost $5 or $150 today, and shoes were required, but the military could wear boots. It was said that the base of an enormous centerpiece candelabra holding numerous expensive beeswax candles was made from a cannonball shell that had been transported from the fields of the Battle of Yorktown. Lafayette left Frederick at 8:30 a.m. on December 31st and returned to Washington, D.C. He then moved south to the Carolinas and Georgia and west to the new states of Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. From New Orleans, it was up the Mississippi River by steamboat to Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. He then went back through Pennsylvania, arriving in Erie, where he spent time at Niagara Falls. He then followed the sections of the new but unfinished Erie Canal, eventually arriving in Albany, New York. Then it was down the Hudson River and on to Boston, timed so as to have him ceremoniously lay the cornerstone of the Bunker Hill Monument, celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Bunker Hill. Every possible type of event was held to honor Lafayette: picnics and parades, dedications and balls, and all were accompanied by grand speeches that spoke of national gratitude, Lafayette's honor and virtues, his valor and dedication to the ideals of liberty. Yet every speech reflected the monumental joy and love felt by all for their hero. The tour ended in Washington, D.C., where Lafayette celebrated his 68th birthday, hosted by John Quincy Adams at the White House on September 6th. Sadly, on September 9th, Lafayette and his party boarded the steamboat Mount Vernon in Washington, D.C., and traveled down the Potomac to St. Mary's City, Maryland. There he boarded the frigate, the Brandywine, for his final trip back home to France. Lafayette died on May 20th of 1834 and was buried at Picpus Cemetery in Paris, next to his lifelong love, Adrienne. As per his father's request, his son Georges covered his coffin with soil that he and his father had collected at Bunker Hill. Today, I do not have the time to detail Lafayette's remarkable humanity and his generosity, but examples of these virtues are reflected in his lasting friendships with two African-American slaves, Hannah Till, George Washington's cook, who Lafayette asked to help him with his English, and James Armistead, Lafayette, who bravely chose to spy on the British at Lafayette's request. Notice I said request and not order. Nor do I have the time to talk about all the places Lafayette visited in America in general, or in particular in Maryland. But what I can guarantee is that in 2024 through 2025, each of these cities and towns will have a celebratory event, and it will be held on the exact date of Lafayette's visit 200 years prior. These celebrations are now being planned and coordinated by the American Friends of Lafayette, or AFL for short. The AFL was founded on May 20th of 1932 at Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania. We work to promote a public awareness of Lafayette as a great leader and document his contributions to our nation's struggle for independence. We support ongoing research into Lafayette's life, actions, deeds, and his contributions to the ideals of democracy in both America and France. And by the way, as you can see by the pictures, we do have a lot of fun. In 2024 through 2025, the goal of the American Friends of Lafayette is to have every American join with us as we recreate and celebrate Lafayette's farewell tour to America. We will start in New York City, just as Lafayette did when he first arrived from France. Over the next 13 months, we will follow the map of his tour in the exact order he followed it 200 years ago. On October 7th, we will be at Fort McHenry when the Museum of the American Revolution's replica of the Washington's campaign tent will be on display just as the original tent was in 1824. We will reenact Lafayette's emotional visit when he first saw the very tent in which he and George Washington had spent so much time together, sharing what was quickly to be their close father-son bond. On October 17th of 2024, join us as we travel to Washington's tomb at Mount Vernon to commemorate Lafayette's sad and tearful visits. October 19th, meet us in Yorktown to celebrate both the victory of 1781 and Lafayette's return on that very same day in 1824. In August of 2025, join us as we mark the occasion when the New York State Militia, the 2nd Battalion, 11th New York Artillery, first adopted the name National Guard to honor Lafayette as the commander-in-chief of the French National Guard. By 1916, it became the official name for all American organized state militias. Finally, join us in Washington, D.C. to bid Lafayette farewell as we board a boat and sail down the Potomac River, waving as we sail past Mount Vernon, just as he did 200 years earlier. So how can all of you help in our bicentennial committee? We are now busy researching Lafayette's visits to America, including Maryland. When we find speeches, we will need reenactors to read them. If there was a review of militia, we will need soldiers in dress uniform. If there was a parade, we will need people to raise loud huzzahs. And if there was a banquet or ball, we will need help to recreate it, including the menus. We will not be simply throwing parties and commemorations, but rather showing the public exactly what happened on each day 200 years ago. Yet with all of these events, our greatest goal is to show that Lafayette is still relevant today, that he was not just a savvy major general and a capable diplomat, but also an abolitionist, a supporter of religious freedom and women's rights, and a loud and never ceasing voice for freedom, equality, and democracy. Today, Americans think our present political scene is the most divisive ever, but that 1824 presidential campaign was equally bitter. Yet back then, Lafayette played a major role in uniting our divided nation. Today, we hope that by telling the story of his life, Americans might again patriotically join together in celebration of freedom and democracy, the freedom and democracy Lafayette loved to his last breath. As we solidify our bicentennial plans, each and every one of you can join with the AFL to participate in these celebrations. I have listed the cities Lafayette visited in Maryland. If you see the hometown of one of your friends on this list, we encourage you to reach out to them and ask them to join with you in helping us search the archives, libraries, and historical societies for the newspaper articles, speeches, and menus that told of Lafayette's American visit. And when the time comes, we hope everyone will plan on working with us to recreate those parades, parties, picnics, and grand balls. Please do consider joining the American Friends of Lafayette to not only recreate this farewell tour, but to join us in continuing to bring to life this great man who lived the very values we so need today: friendship, respect, human devotion, humanity, honor, liberty, democracy, and equality for all. Now, in closing, let us remember the young 17-year-old Gilbert Lafayette, who with his zeal for the ideals of liberty and democracy came from France in 1777 and captured the hearts of both his adopted father, George Washington, and his adopted country, America. And let us now celebrate in 2024 through 2025 the bicentennial of Lafayette's farewell tour, together remembering and honoring this man who represents the very definition of democracy, our own American Revolutionary War Major General and the hero of two worlds, the Marquis de Lafayette. Huzzah for America and viva la Lafayette. And thank you. Any questions? I love this man, you can't tell. I will stop sharing, there we go. So yes, it's going to be big, 24 through 25. We are now in the process of getting in National Endowment for the Humanities grants and many grants across all of the states where we will be visiting. And we already have groups that are starting everywhere from Maine to Georgia, Louisiana, New Orleans, up the Mississippi, Erie, all the places that he visited. We have smaller groups beginning to work in those areas. So if you have anyone who is living in those areas, it's funny, our DAR, Janet Montgomery DAR Regent, her family lived in New Orleans and now are in, I can't remember what town they are, north of New Orleans, where Lafayette visited. They're already volunteered to be involved with what's going on with his return tour. So it may not be here in Maryland, but if you know someone elsewhere also, let me know. Any questions about this man and his incredible life?
You did a good job on the presentation.
Thank you, Cheryl. Yeah. I try where I'm going, whatever I'm giving it, to do deep dives in the area. And I had not thought about his work in whether he had been or why he was not part of 1812 when you guys asked me. And I'm like, ooh, I need to go do that research to find out where was he during this time period. And he was
well, that's an important, I think that's just important to know anyway, given his commitment during the revolution. It is kind of curious, and then you find out.
Yeah, and remember, he was writing constantly back and forth to America. He was writing to Madison, he was writing to Monroe, he was writing to the people he still knew, and he knew what was going on with the XYZ affair and the quasi-war with France under Adams, and he knew what was going on with the impressment of our citizens, but not just by the Brits, but by France. And he knew that it would be awkward for him to come to America in 1812, although he wanted to be there in case we declared war on France because of their continued impressment of American sailors. So he very much continued his work at that point, which was very difficult until 1824 under Napoleon, who was just a total jerk. I mean, it was very difficult for him to be able to do anything in relationship to America except continue to write his support and, you know, huzzahs for our 1812 war, because he still hated the British because they killed his father at Minden, the Battle of Minden. So he, from the age of 2, could not stand the British. So that lasted.
Hey, I have a question. You mentioned that when he was in Maryland, that decision was made or proclamation or whatever that any natural born male heir would be an American citizen.
Mm-hmm.
Is that still true today?
Actually, the story that we did it in we were the first. We did it in 1784 because he was back visiting Washington, D.C. at the time, and Annapolis passed the resolution that he should be, in gratitude for his work, a natural born citizen. Then when the Constitution was passed, it was re-emphasized that Lafayette would continue to be a citizen. But when it finally got to the point where in 2002 is when the official declaration was set forward that there would be certain personages, among which was Lafayette, would be declared natural born citizens, which means all of their heir have dual citizenship between whichever country they're in and the United States. So the lineage of Lafayette still remain dual citizens. Other people include Churchill is among those. The gentleman who had done so much work to save the Jews during World War II is also a natural born citizen, and I'm forgetting his name.
Schindler.
Yes, not Schindler. No, it's I can't remember his name. Also, William Penn and his wife, I think Elizabeth or Jane, are both considered natural born citizens. Interestingly enough, there are like 7 or 8 of them who, at the time in 2002, became. So it's a great question, Sue, because yeah, it was 3 times reinforced the fact that yes, indeed, he is an American citizen in all of his errors.
Thanks.
So go out and get your gowns ready. 1824, 1825. Get the gloves.
And I will be able to give you all some names of people that would do a decent job.
That would be good because I
Mhm.
don't know that I'm quite the seamstress to make that kind of gown.
I
Right.
have a gown, but I need the pinnings.
And they had puffier sleeves too. Wasn't 1824?
Right.
still-
If you've ever seen, I don't know if you've ever watched Gentleman Jack on HBO, which is 1830s, they had gotten into those really puffy sleeves to the point where they wear these padded donuts on their arms to make them puff out. So it's kind of, the 20s are kind of that transition. And you'll be able to see the video from our July program since you're participating. But that the waistlines come down a little bit, the skirts aren't as gathered, the hairstyles have the center part, and the side, you know, there's just things that are iconic 1820s that are a little different than the teens.
And who
It's
does
very much a transitional decade.
not want to dress up? I mean, really. Anyhow,
Hey, I'm sitting here sewing as we speak.
I don't want to dress up. I'll be the person in the crowd saying, yeah.
stop. You know what's funny is that I'm point on Fort McHenry and the dual session of Congress. Thanks a lot. They give me the easy ones. But we actually have that tent coming down and it's going to be there. And what is funny, when I was working with the National Park Service, they have been so supportive because many people say they're really difficult to work with, but they are not. They have drunk the Kool-Aid. But we're talking about them putting the tent up, and Tim Ertl and Angel Garcia, who's the guy who does the plot areas, he goes, yeah, he goes, we're gonna have to be a little careful where they put it because there are still some unexploded ordinances on the premises of Fort McHenry. And I'm like, I'm not gonna be there when they put this tent up. I'll see you later, put the tent up. But we are going to reenact that. And we did a walkthrough the other day, and we're gonna actually put the tent outside of Fort McHenry because we cannot, they won't allow people into the fort without buying a pass. And we don't want people to have to buy a pass to do this. So
Right.
because Lafayette landed on with the United States steamship on the wharf, we're going to be using the taxi, the water taxi, to transport our Lafayette, who is going to be a reenactor. The reenactor we're going to be using is Mark Schneider, who is the reenactor from Colonial Williamsburg. We've met him. He's awesome. He is really good. And Rob Goldman, who also does an incredible interpretation of Lafayette. And then we'll have 2 others, but they'll be portraying Lafayette at that age. So he's going to come up on the wharf. We're going to line the area with hopefully lots of people, and then he's going to be escorted. Now, one of the problems we were talking about is how do we get a militia of 1824 soldiers in that costume? It's going to be really hard because there's not many around. So because of this relationship of Lafayette to the National Guard, and because the National Guard was named after him, Tim Gowan, who is the head of the Maryland National Guard, and I have gotten to know each other pretty well. And so we are going to possibly have the Maryland National Guard dressed in dress uniforms portraying what would have been the 1824 militia. Because what happened is he walked up and he thought he was going to go and shake hands with all of these 1824 militia. But what happened is as he walked up, the crowd separated. And what he then saw was the tent. And he just lost it. He totally lost it. He was unable to keep going out without just being in tears. And then when he got to the tent, inside the tent was John Eager Howard, who he'd been fighting with. And that's when he really lost it. And later on, at a big dinner that was held in Baltimore that evening, John Quincy Adams made a toast. And he said, to the gratitude and tears of joy that were that happened in the tent of Washington today because of just everybody was going crazy. So we are going to be reenacting all of that. And he was greeted by the mayor of Boston, the mayor of Baltimore, but then the governor of the state was actually in the tent when he got close to it and came out and introduced himself and welcomed him. So
Who was
whoever,
governor at the time? Was
Yeah.
it Howard?
no, Stevenson, I think.
Was Howard governor later then or
Later,
before?
it wasn't, yeah, it wasn't Howard then. It was not, I think it was Stevens, who was there. So no matter who the governor is in 2024, we're going to be inviting them to come down to do this reenactment for real life and have that person there. And the person who is the mayor of, whoever the mayor of Baltimore is, whether it's male or female, we're going to have them doing this as part of it. We're going to try to get them to dress up too, because that'll be part of it. I think it's going to be funny if it happens to be a woman, but I think we're still going to get that to happen. We're working on that anyhow. So that, and then the joint session of Congress is really the one that's going to be interesting. And that one also was really, really odd because it was December 9th that Lafayette came and he was greeted by the Senate, but the Senate apparently stood up, took their hats off, but weren't really kind of like this all over kind of engaging. And later on, they were critiqued by the press that night. And so the next day, on the 10th of December, Henry Clay was the Speaker of the House. And so Lafayette was escorted in. And at that point, Henry Clay said to the House of Representatives, I want you all to move to the right. And at that point, he invited the Senate to come in and sit, kind of to make up their behavior. And so it ended up being a joint session of Congress because of Henry Clay's invitation for them to come in. So we are going to look at how we can possibly reenact this in the same, because the Senate is, the House of Representatives and the Senate, Congress will be in session on December 10th of 2024. So.
Good luck.
I'm going to retire my number if I get this one to work.
If they can agree to anything.
Right.
Well, again,
They may not want to be speaking to each other. That'll be after the election.
this is like we're trying desperately to use this man as an example of coming together, not separating, because this is what he did. He
Won't
represented.
happen.
But it was like Susan, yeah, I call it the Velcro wall. If it sticks, great. If it doesn't stick, we'll figure out something. So yeah, we'll see.
Well, we definitely need a seamstress names or multiple ones, because it sounds like we're going to need a daytime outfit and a gown for the ball.
Yeah, and that the plans for that are going to be. I was talking to Chuck today. Chuck Schwam is our event planner. He's our treasurer and event planner extraordinaire, and you know, we're open. It depends on what the committee wants to do up there. And you guys are definitely invited, Vicki, as you can commit for 1812. And the regent of the DAR Frederick chapter, whose name I'm
Francis.
Francis is 100% behind it. And Sharon Suarez is behind it with the Carrollton Manor chapter. So and the SAR is like, they drank the Kool-Aid a while ago. So they're really, really into it.
And they're the Eberhard chapter, I think.
Yeah, that's why I was like geared for that.
Yeah, so when I heard that name, it's like, oh, that's the
Yeah.
Eberhard chapter
Yeah.
SAR.
Exactly.
Well, Ed the other night, the president of Sarnes Lauren Everhart the other night, he was at an awards ceremony with us, and Joanne and I, and he was trying to get us, he started talking about this date to reserve this date, and we already knew all about it. And he was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, we're like, we've already volunteered. We're in. Teresa and I are in. Whatever you want to do, we're in it. But who is going to be our point person? If you're the point person for those two other.
It's myself and Chuck. Chuck and I both are doing that. We're doing Annapolis. But there are also some people already involved up there. So he is actually putting together that list. Today, when I saw him, he is going to be putting together a list for the formal invites. And I've given your name and Teresa's name, I gave them, and Francis' name, I gave them all the names of people who wanted to do. And then you can invite someone else from your chapters to get involved with this. Because it can be, we haven't decided whether it's going to be the dinner or the ball. I'm in favor of the ball, but I mean, whatever you want to do.
You need some English country dancing if it's the ball.
Yeah. Yeah, don't look at me. Not happening.
I don't know. My biggest problem is, ever since we started talking about this, I've been putting on my thinking cap, like, where can we have a ball? Where can we have a ball? And who was
It may
telling
not be able to be a
people there were like
historic building.
500 people at this ball, and there's very few places in Frederick that'll be able to fit 500 people.
It
Well,
might have to be like a hotel or convention.
We only have
don't have
one
any.
hotel. We have one hotel that can hold that many people. We got a lot of hotels, but none of them are convention hotels.
Right.
Hotels. So they have no meeting
Well,
space.
and the thing is, it's in December, right?
in December, the end
Yeah,
of,
because otherwise it could be outdoors, but
Number 30th. And we're still gonna figure out exactly how many numbers, and we would like to go to the number, but we can go smaller if we need to. But you had said the fire hall, which has chandeliers, and I'm like,
it would only, I think our number is 450. If we're not having a sit down dinner, I think we can get 450 to 475 in there without sitting.
Mhm.
I think 475 is our fire code.
you might be able to just do like high hors d'oeuvres well, I know you want to see what they had.
Yep, we're gonna go back and look at the menus.
Have you ever spoken to Joyce White, A Taste of History?
No.
She is a historic food person and she does a lot of events in Annapolis, especially at the Hammond Harwood House. She has a website called A Taste of History with Joyce White. And she is excellent. When I do events, my little group that does events for Historic Annapolis, she always prepares food for us just out of the goodness of her heart because it gives her press.
That is
But
great.
she does weddings and stuff, but it's researched period food.
That is perfect. That's what we need to get that kind of.
So I would look her up.
Vicky, I know
Yes.
we could go on and talk and talk and talk, but I need to get us back to the meeting if you want
Okay.
to record the minutes for the meeting. Sorry, Patty.
Oh, no, don't worry. I'm just saying, yeah, I'm done.
No,
I'm
I
gonna
know,
stop
but
recording
I
too.
find all the conversation interesting, but I know it would be nice